Hey folks, my program Roske on Politics will be returning every Sunday morning the whole month before the election. We're going to be focusing on 3 races. You've got former Congressman David Young versus current Congresswoman Cindy Axne. You got Ernst versus Greenfield, and of course, President Donald Trump versus former Vice President Joe Biden. But we're also going to be talking to community leaders. We're going to be chatting with the head of Iowa's NAACP, the chair of the Iowa Black Caucus, because the controversy and the conflict that is so rampant in today's American politics, we're going to do what we can to help unify this country before this historic election. That's every Sunday the whole month before the election. I hope you'll tune in. Hi folks, welcome to the program. So this episode's a little different than what you may be used to. You're not going to see me on camera today. You're just going to hear voices of folks from the Black Lives Matter movement here in Iowa. Never in my lifetime have I heard such a large group of American citizens feel justifiably angry and upset with inequality in income and housing and racial injustice and the justice system. So this episode is about hearing other voices, a different perspective than the viewers of this program might be used to listening to. And I hope you don't change channel, but I hope you listen to the real concerns and the hopes for their children and our children and this country. So with no commercial breaks, Roske on Politics here are just some of the voices for the Black Lives Matter movement here in Iowa.
I've been involved in this fight for over 50 years, over 5 decades. I started when I was in the Black Panther Party, when I was at the ripe age of 17, where a lot of our young people are today. And it's really unfortunate though, Brent, because I just turned 69. So that means that we have been trying to address these issues correctively, trying to correct these issues of injustice for many a year now. And that's the sad part of this whole struggle. Creative Visions was created because of the shootings that were taking place, the drug trade that was taking place in years ago, 24 years ago. When a young lady named Phyllis Davis, God rest her soul, was shot to death in a gang crossfire on 19th University. And what you see behind me is a building that provides resources for those who want to change their lives and make a difference. And all we can do, we can provide resources. We can't fix anybody. We can provide resources so they can make some healthy choices. And what you see on this wall, unfortunately, are about 210 names of individuals who have lost their lives, during this tenure. And on the tombstone that you have here, unfortunately, is the name of my son, who lost his life in '97, being shot, in the chest right here. So there's an investment in this community. We've seen in the last few months that things could be corrected immediately. You look at the Iowa Democratic Legislative Black Caucus, who worked with the House and the Senate, the governor, and individuals, as I call them, game changers that's in the street been protesting. We all worked together, and we were able to get some legislation passed in 2 weeks to start some other corrective measures. That means if we could do that in 2 weeks, then we should have been able to resolve a lot of these issues and disparities over 50 years ago. We shouldn't be fighting the same fight of voting like Dr. King did. We shouldn't be saying that people should be treated like human beings, like Harriet Tubman had to. We shouldn't see a George Floyd happen in the 21st century. That's ridiculous. But signs and symbols are for the conscious mind, Brent. We've seen Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin. We've seen what happened to Michael. We've seen what happened to the little 12-year-old that was killed within 2 minutes after the police showed up. We've seen the disparity in economics. We've seen the disparity in the political system, educational system, medical system. Those things could be corrected, and they could be corrected in a very short time if we as America quit living a hypocritical life. We have to stop, but we have to have those type of conversations, those real conversations about the hypocrisy in America. You know, because an individual shouldn't look at another individual as being subhuman. You know, shouldn't look at an individual like a threat because of the color of the skin. You know, so that means we have to have that training within the police department, within the state troopers, and within the community. You know, that training needs to be spread out so that we can address that, because we can't keep allowing individuals to be killed in this country, and not just black people. You know, every race, every gender needs to stand up so we can work together, and we have to be able to say enough is enough. But we can't keep using this mindset that these are first steps. No, the first step that was ever taken was that slave decided not to be a slave and decided to run. That's the first step. Now this country has put us in a perpetual reactionary mode that to correct injustice, because every time we take steps to correct it, we end up having to fight for voter rights. We have to end up fighting voter suppression. We have to end up fighting those things that we shouldn't have to fight anymore, because everybody should say you have a right to vote. Everyone's treated. And then we take on the language, Brett, that, you know, well, we have to have our civil rights. And I say to people, and in all my speeches and my workshops, you have to have human rights before you have civil rights. If we don't look at women and people of different nationalities as human beings, then we can't even look at systemically including civil rights. What happens is we cosmetically include civil rights, not systemically, because we're not looking at these individuals as being human. We look at these individuals, especially people of color, as being feared, as being animals, rather than looking at individuals as human and a society that needs to take corrective measures so that we can resolve these issues.
Iowa is a state that has really mastered the art of covert racism. This is a very difficult state to be black in. And the challenge that's associated with covert racism is that oftentimes we can't quite put our finger on it. You know, if somebody burns a cross in my front yard, I could very directly point to that and say, this is deeply offensive. But if I experience microaggressions on a daily basis in my place of employment, in my political party, in the grocery store when I'm just trying to pick up some food after work, and I can't quite put my finger on it, it makes it difficult for me to articulate to people so that they can understand what I'm talking about, particularly white people who historically have felt like unless they understand the experience, they don't have to take it into consideration. That creates a lot of challenge, and that is the day-to-day experience for black people in the state, just microaggression after microaggression.
How would you react to criticisms of the protests?
I think about the protests that occurred in this country after Brown versus Board of Education. You know, white people destroying property, engaging in wantonly criminal activity in response to the Supreme Court voting making it a reality that black people could go to schools that white people go to. You know, the fact that the descendants of those people, many of whom are still alive, are now poo-pooing the protests that are happening, protests that are happening simply because people are advocating for their lives, is, I mean, it's beyond hypocritical. Jesus Christ himself said, "And a little child shall lead." You know, Des Moines Black Lives Matter is primarily comprised of people that are young enough to be my child. people in their teens and early 20s. And they are affecting change in a way that central Iowa, the state of Iowa, has never seen before. And I personally stand back and I enjoy watching it happen. I ask myself, how can I be supportive of the young people that are affecting change? And at the very least, how can I not be an impediment to their progress? And I would invite those of us who are over the age of 40 to do the same. This is what's happening is what's supposed to happen. We're handing off society to the future generation, and they're doing a lot more with it than we ever could. And so let's honor that, and let's support that, and let's nurture it, because that truly will create an Iowa that's just and verdant and equitable for all of us.
The worst thing that I see portrayed off in the media, not necessarily how the media is reporting on it, but the comments that I read underneath the post. For instance, KCCI's comment section. When I read that, sometimes I get very disheartened about who we are as a community. I do, for the most part, think the stations are portraying it, as bias-free as possible. But you see a lot of bias in community members when they go out there and comment, especially to the negative side of things. And that is very disheartening as somebody who considers Des Moines home.
What sort of negativity are you seeing?
So I'm seeing folks saying, they need to shoot the protesters. They need to put water hoses on them. Very reminiscent of the comments that were made back in the 1960s. Especially demeaning because of the kids that they're talking about. These are kids that look like me, that are not, that many years removed from me, and that are exercising their constitutional right to peacefully protest. It's deeply concerning when people care more about property damage than bodily harm. For 8 minutes and 46 seconds, an officer stood on the neck of George Floyd. This past weekend in Kenosha, 7 shots to a man's back, right? This is way more concerning than any property damage that anybody can have, especially when a lot of these businesses, they have insurance. That will be covered. That will be made whole again. George Floyd will never be made whole. His family will never be made whole. Young man in Kenosha, Wisconsin, he's paralyzed right now. He'll never be whole again. It's deeply concerning that, here's the thing, police officers, not even to say police officers aren't supposed to kill innocent people. They're not even supposed to kill guilty people. And when we continue to have that happen across this country, and you have those who sometimes seem like that's not really much of a care for them. It saddens me that, we don't see somebody's life as valuable as we see somebody's property.
I can't say that it hasn't taken its emotional toll on myself, all the individuals that are involved, and including some of the protesters and police officers and everyone. So it has taken its emotional toll. But I think the big thing that we learned was that, individuals are tired of seeing a society where certain individuals can murder other individuals and completely get away with it scot-free. We understand that we live in a society where, unfortunately, bad people are going to take an individual's life. But when you see a fact that, someone can take another individual's life, and there's absolutely no recourse to that, that is where we have that lack of justice. When individuals can take another human being's life, and there's no arrest, there's no prosecution, there's no jail time, the concern that brings amongst the society is that, at any point in time, any one of us can be a victim, and there's absolutely nothing to stop individuals. Because if you don't point out a wrong and correct it, then that wrong is going to keep happening again and again and again. And that's what drove the fear in my heart and other people's hearts. And I think that's what also drove the anger in some of these young individuals who were protesters, is seeing that, it felt like the black community was under assault. We can at any time be attacked and killed. No one will be held responsible, and nothing's going to happen about it. And I'm hoping that today we've had a lot of these young people lead the charge to say that's no longer acceptable, that will no longer happen. And I hope that the Black Caucus can use its voice to help amplify these concerns and address them, and more importantly say, if you're an elected official, we expect you to address this. And if you're not addressing this, we're going to make sure that we point that out and that we recruit somebody else to run against you. My experience has been that black people face disparities in a manner that most people cannot comprehend. We face disparities in education, in healthcare, in jobs. We face disparities when it comes to representation within our elected officials, and we also face disparities when it comes to just your normal, average, everyday things that other people might not be aware of. A thing that I like to point out to people is I recently had an experience when I went to go down to the Creston Civil Rights Coalition, and when I went down there, I was sitting in a parking lot. 2 police officers pulled up to me, came on either side of my car with their hands on their guns, walking up to my vehicle, one on the passenger side and one on the driver's side, and asked me what I was doing there, who I was, why I'd come to Creston, all those kind of things. I was scared for my life. Now, most other individuals in that situation would not have to face that sort of reality. I'm scared that I may be shot to death when I'm coming down to speak to the Civil Rights Commission. And yet, I have officers approaching me with guns to ask me what I'm doing. And all I did was stop in a parking lot to make a phone call. So it's that type of disparity that people do not understand. You are immediately taken as a suspect no matter what you do. And at that point in time, I felt to myself, this is what we have to change. It's not just the policies, but it's the attitudes and behaviors of people that have to change to make sure that we have true equality in this system.
When people say things like, I think the Black Lives Matter movement is a terrorist organization, and you hear things like that, what do you think?
It disillusions me because it says to me that people don't understand the times that we live in, number one. Number two, historically, the condition of Black Americans in this country. And number three, systemic racism. Black Lives Matter is an organization that I have supported ever since its initiation a few years ago, and it is not a terrorist organization. It is a strong, healthy organization that supports the progress and the justice for African Americans in this country, and I'm glad that we have a strong organization here in Des Moines.
What is it like living in Des Moines and in Iowa as a person of color?
I have been in Iowa my whole life. That's 73 years. So I go back, I have seen progress because in the 60s, which I'm a child of, there were places where I knew I wasn't welcome, where I couldn't go. Today, I don't feel that way, and yet I know that racism still exists. I think my comfort level is good because I'm a state representative. Most people know who I am, so when I enter a restaurant or a place, other places of recreation, people know me, so they treat me well. I'm keenly aware, though, that if I was not well known, I might not be so respectfully treated, and I might be one of those people that if we did not have the pandemic, that I could be followed in a store. I'm keenly aware of that.
What would you say to young people coming up right now if they're feeling disheartened after the deaths of Mr. Floyd and Miss Taylor? What would you say to them watching?
I'm certain that they are disillusioned because it's a terrible situation. I would tell them, number one, that it's a part of our history, that Black people have been discriminated against and persecuted with the entire time they have been in this country. So young people, first of all, need to know their history so that they know exactly where we are in the point of progress. I would say, be proud of being Black. Realize that one person can make a difference by the way you carry yourself, and to continue to fight for change and to have hope. It's gotten better for me. It will continue to get better. I do believe, and I would say this to young people too, I do believe that we are on the brink of a cultural change. I really believe that.
After 73 years, when you turned on the news and saw that Mr. Floyd had been killed in such a horrific and tragic way, what were your thoughts?
I was sitting at my kitchen table, I think Memorial Day, or certainly the Tuesday after that. I had not heard about it, And I looked at the TV and I saw this police officer with his knee on his neck. I knew he was going to die, and I couldn't believe that I was watching it unfold live in front of me. And what I thought was, thank God somebody got this on tape so that people can see what we have been going through the entire time I have been alive. This George Floyd was not the first person to be killed, and I'll say killed, murdered by the police. When I was a child, I used to hear about things that would happen, from the arrest in the car ride to the police station, and then after you got to the police station. So it was not new to me, but I was glad that people could see it because I knew people would be surprised. Sometimes when you talk to people who are not people of color, they just don't get it. And it's really not their fault. They haven't experienced it. This, I thought, would be illuminating, as it turned out to be. I was also saddened. I didn't cry, but I felt my whole insides drop. It was sad.
Well, I feel that the senseless deaths of Mr. Floyd and Miss Taylor is a clear indication that being black in America comes with the death sentence as soon as we come out of our mother's womb. These names have hit national news, and as important as they are to us, let us not forget the names of the 164 black men and women who have been killed at the hands of police this year alone, whose names we have not even heard of. Dr. King once said that history will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. My parents, they raised me in church, and I relied strongly on my faith in God to get me through difficult moments in life. One of the things I fondly remember being taught as a child was to love my enemies and do good to them who hate me. And my question after growing up in this world that we call the United States of America is, how am I supposed to love a country who does not love me back? How can I love a country where in the year 2020, I have to talk about banning chokeholds? How can I love a country that shoots my black brothers and sisters down like dogs? So that's why these last few years I haven't been able to celebrate July 4th as others normally would. I celebrate July 5th. I celebrate the speech that Frederick Douglass gave, where he asked the question, what to the slave is the 4th of July? And his conclusion is, this 4th of July is yours and not mine. My vision for the future realistically would be to turn on the TV and not have to fear another black human being being killed at the hands of police. But with all things, there must be a starting point. One of the things that I've heard the most from our young people is the need for police reform. Nothing will ever change if they do not get the proper training on how to properly de-escalate situations, and this training needs to take place more than once a year. I believe that protesting and marching is much needed. It lets the world know that we won't be hushed, but if we want to make real change, it's going to take us voting on November 3rd. We need to get people elected to office who will get legislation passed to end the injustices that choke us on a daily basis. You cannot talk about the civil rights movement without the church. I really think that the church's voice has gotten louder in its response to the tragic hand that we have been dealt in America. Houses of worship are made up of community, and if the community cannot look to its faith leaders for insight, then I really think that we have missed the mark. Jesus was never confined to one location. He was always moving. Ministry is more than the four walls of the church. It is out there in the streets where the real work must be done.
Well, first, the first thing to be clear on is, if you consider a peaceful protest a protest where no property damage has occurred and no bodily injury has occurred, then according to the FBI's investigation, 93% of the protests taking place right now are peaceful. 93%. So I think that's the biggest thing to, when people are talking, that's the biggest thing to point out, is that this overwhelming, mass hysteria and chaos that is erupting across the country is a media ploy, and it's not it's not supported by the actuality of the facts. So that's number one. Number two, people are being shot in the street. People are paying money as taxpayers to people for a job, and these people have decided that they are the overwhelming authority for the entire criminal justice system. They are the person who decides whether you should be arrested. They are the person who then decides whether what you did was or was not illegal. They are then the people who decide what your sentence should be, and then they are the people to carry out that execution, and they do it all within 5 minutes of showing up to a scene. George Floyd was murdered by asphyxiation by police officers by holding him down and compressing his chest for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. He was confronted by police in the first place because of a counterfeit $20 bill that, lo and behold, turned out not to be counterfeit. So now we have a man who was killed, not allowed to breathe for 8 minutes and 46 seconds until he died, on the basis of a alleged, suspected counterfeit $20 bill that ended up not even being a counterfeit $20 bill, which is exactly why it's not their job to be judge, jury, and executioner. That's exactly why that is not their job. That this police force is the standing army that the people who wrote the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence warned us about.
I would say get involved. Don't just stand aside and say, I understand. Join an organization. Be a part of a protest. Befriend more people of color. Subscribe to magazines published by people of color. Read more. Do more. Just don't talk the talk. Walk the walk.
I looked into those young adults, those eyes, and I'm standing, and I was closer to them than you and I are standing, and looking eye to eye with these individuals, and you see the tears coming down some of the protesters' eyes, and you see the pain and the anger that's there because they don't know. And then I turn around and I looked at the police department, and a lot of those individuals, I'm looking at their pain because they don't know what to do, because they don't have understanding. Because no one has sat down with them. No one has really taken them out of that comfort zone of a job and said, what you're seeing and experiencing now is this hurt and this pain, this miscommunication. What you're seeing now is decades of hurt and pain. And so that's what I try to work on. And but when you stand in the middle, you get hit by everybody. And now we're showing them and telling them and asking them, let's work together.